A reading from the Gospel according to Mark. King Herod heard of it, for Jesus had become known. Some were saying, "John the Baptizer has been raised from the dead, and for this reason these powers are at work in him." But others said, "It is Elijah." And others said, "It is a prophet, like one of the prophets of old." But when Herod heard of it, he said, "John, whom I beheaded, has been raised." For Herod himself had sent men who had arrested John, bound him, and put him in prison on the account of Herodias, his brother Philip's wife, because Herod had married her. For John had been telling Herod, "It is not lawful for you to have your brother's wife," and Herodias had a grudge against him and wanted to kill him. But she could not, for Herod feared John, knowing that he was a righteous and holy man, and he protected him. When he had heard him, he was greatly perplexed, and yet he liked to listen to him. But an opportunity came when Herod, on his birthday, gave a banquet for his courtiers and officers and the leaders of Galilee. And when his daughter Herodias came in and danced, she pleased Herod and his guests. And the king said to the girl, "Ask me for whatever you wish, and I will give it." He solemnly swore to her, "Whatever you ask me, I will give you, even half of my kingdom." She went out and said to her mother, "What should I ask for?" And she replied, "The head of John the Baptizer." Immediately she rushed back to the king and requested, "I want you to give me at once the head of John the Baptist on a platter." The king was deeply grieved, yet out of regard for his oaths and for the guests, he did not want to refuse her. Immediately the king sent a soldier of the guard with orders to bring John's head. He went and beheaded him in the prison, brought his head on a platter, and gave it to the girl. Then the girl gave it to her mother. And when his disciples heard about it, they came and they took his body, and they laid it in a tomb. The word of the Lord. This day we hear the story of the rather gruesome end of John the Baptist. We heard in the Gospels, as they frequently reference, when John had been out preaching in the wilderness and collecting disciples, and then he had been arrested and taken away from them, and that was the moment when Jesus stepped into the forefront, that many of Jesus's first disciples were disciples of John the Baptist, who, after he was arrested and taken from them, came to follow Jesus as their leader. This is the story where we come back to what eventually happened to John in prison. This rather, again, gruesome story of his beheading, seemingly out of a grudge, seemingly out of an unwillingness to accept that you are not at the center of things, you are not in control and the most powerful, and sometimes you even get things wrong. And such was Herodias' unwillingness to consider that maybe she was wrong, that she would rather lash out and punish others than to accept that. This is a story that tells me a couple of things. One, it's a story about the peril of putting ourselves first. Remembering that when we put ourselves first ahead of God's will, that God's will be done anyway. That when we put ourselves ahead of God and love of neighbor, that people get hurt unnecessarily. And at the end of the day, God's will still will be done. Now, I'm not saying that out of some kind of lofty belief that God necessarily will always take the evil things that you might do and somehow turn them and use them for good. I'm not sure that I always believe that, but I am sure that God does have a plan for us and a plan for this world, and it's a plan of love. And I am sure that even when we choose not to participate in it, when we choose the way of hate and division instead, I don't think that stands in the way of God's plan for us. And look, in this story, Hate and division did not stop God's plan. When John the Baptist was taken away from them, it just cleared the path for Jesus to step in and begin his ministry. So while we can certainly mourn the loss of John the Baptist, celebrate the life he had and the ministries that he had and his martyrdom, we can at the same time recognize that nothing, whether we choose to participate in it or not, nothing will stop God's plan of love for this world to come to fruition. So let's choose the path of supporting it and being a part of it, rather than trying to stand in the way and be about ourselves instead.